And then the bird is just this little creature, this life that I feel joy in my heart when I look at them.
I am a strong believer that no bird is a basic bird. There's no boring birds. Every bird is interesting. You just kind of change your lens a little bit. They're still cool and they're still necessary.
The more I learn about birds, the more I'm fascinated by them. They're just such amazing creatures.
March 8th every year is International Women's Day. This annual event provides a focus to celebrate the achievements of women and a call to action to challenge gender disparity. In episode 91, I revisit conversations I've had with awesome women birders, where they tell how birds have touched their lives. Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Suzy Buttress. As a casual birder, I take time to watch birds as I go about my daily tasks. In my show, I'll tell you about the wild birds I've seen, speak with other enthusiasts, take bird walks, and share stories from listeners around the world. A wonderful benefit of creating this podcast has been getting to speak with passionate, knowledgeable, and enthusiastic birders around the world. In this episode, I share the voices of women birders from the science and creative arts communities who've been inspired through watching and studying birds. In these segments from previous episodes, we learn how each person discovered their connection with birds and hear some of their favourite bird moments or observations. If you'd like to listen to the full episodes, the links to each are in the episode notes. The featured birders are, from the science community, ornithologist and presenter Dan Rouse, wildlife biologist Danielle Belleny, and science educator Camille. And from the creative arts community, Kate Shaw, host of Strange Animals podcast, Carrie Poppy, co-host of Oh No, Ross and Carrie, Jessica Delisle, co-host of Retail Nightmares, and Carla, co-host of Number One Rerun podcast and founder of the Britpod Scene Collective, singer-songwriter Stephanie Seymour, writer and producer for CNN Special Projects Amy Chillag, and photographer Jocelyn Anderson. In episode 72, ornithologist and conservationist Dan Rouse joined me for a walk on Rhossili Headland on the Gower Peninsula in Wales. I had a wonderful morning with her, learning about the birds found on that coastline. Dan told me how she started out in birdwatching.
Yeah, so I started birdwatching when I was 6. So my dad built me a little bird feeder. It was out of like an old nest box that had fallen apart. So he knocked it together. I made like this little wooden house bird feeder. And I used to write down all the birds you could see in the garden. They were all in Welsh because I didn't learn English until a bit later. We would go to bird parks and wildlife parks. Dad and my brother would go cycling or go fishing. I would sit in the tree and count all the birds I could see. So a lot of my school notebooks was, when you're older, what do you want to be? It's like, I want to cuddle ducks. That's all I want to do. I want to cuddle ducks. And then when I turned 16, I got hired by WWT as a learning assistant. So I started teaching kids, teaching schools about wildlife and wetlands, why we need wetlands, and also wildfowl. So my passion for wildfowl started there. But then since that time, I've sort of grown more and more. I've started doing radio shows, TV shows, and then being spotted by BBC and spotted by S4C. So everything has sort of just gradually got bigger and bigger. And now it's to the point where I can talk about messages. So there's a lot of stuff I'm passionate about, like bird watching that is accessible for everyone. Everyone should be able to get out bird watching. Conserving wildlife is a huge one of mine, especially Welsh wildlife. It's sort of overlooked a little bit. So everything is in Britain, we have these and these, but you look at every one of the sites they mention and it's all Scotland and England, and it's like, well, Wales has got this as well, and we've actually got more than you do, but we're not advertised.
One of the things you mentioned about the bird watching, that you're really into the wildfowl.
I love ducks, anything ducks and geese. Geese are like my main thing. So when I was with WWT, we used to breed all the geese and ducks and swans, cranes, flamingos. We breed them, monitor them. I still do it, even though I'm not with WWT anymore. I'm a BTO ambassador for Carmarthenshire. So I'll sit there and I will count through as many ducks and geese as I can, monitor the juvenile to adult ratios, and then send off all that data.
On the subject of geese, I know some people have got some quite strong opinions about geese.
They're not best loved at all.
So why do you think that is?
Geese are very brilliant parents. So there's scars all over my hands and my arms, and they're all from geese. So they are the best parents. So geese have as many eggs as they can cope with. So if a mother's a first-time mother, they may not have 5 eggs, they may have 3 eggs. She knows that she's got a 1 in 3 chance of it hatching, and she can look after that one. Whereas ducks, their way is 10% or 20% of their clutch will survive. So if I have 10 eggs, maybe 2 will get to adulthood. But it's with geese, a lot of people don't like geese just because they're nasty, they hiss. But that's just because the geese, it's the same as if someone came near your children, you'd tell them off. So they just hiss at you. A lot of the time they don't bite you, they just sort of run at you and then stop.
So they're quite protective.
Yeah.
And what about swans? Because swans are quite big, powerful birds and can feel quite aggressive.
Yeah, swans are pretty bad. It's the only bird that's ever made me cry is the swan.
Oh no, what happened?
When we were catching up one of the swans, it caught me with a carpal joint in my throat.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was my own fault. Sort of trying to catch it whilst trying to shout to someone else what to do, and it just got caught awkwardly. But it's one of those ones sobbing, holding that swan. It's like, oh, you all right? And you're like, shut up, just bring it.
Dan recently published a book called How to Attract Birds to Your Garden. Do check it out. Danielle Belleny is a wildlife biologist, member of the Black AF in STEM collective, and co-founder of Black Birders Week. In episode 81, she told me how she discovered her love of birds.
My gateway was through an internship that I had in my undergrad at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. The internship required me to basically walk around in the scrub brush of South Texas and look for a bird nest. And I did just that, and I did it so well. The first nest that I found was a greater roadrunner, and I was able to watch these little eggs that turned into little babies, that turned into little velociraptors, pretty much. I was able to watch them fledge from the nest, and that was just a life-changing moment. Seeing that bird that also reminds me so much of home, it just really sparked an interest in me. So after undergraduate, I went on to do another internship with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, doing more wildlife-based things, not necessarily just with birds, expanding my reach. And then I went into grad school at Tarleton State University, and that's when I started focusing a lot more on birds, because I realized how important they actually can be for wildlife conservation, not just for birds, but they can be a species used to protect all kinds of wildlife species and all kinds of grasses and plants and invertebrates, and et cetera. I studied northern bobwhite, and I graduated about 2 years ago. Time is really flying, but through that whole journey, it's not that simple. It was filled with a lot of free falls, a lot of stumbling, a lot of hard work though. And that pretty much got me to where I am today. I'm now a wildlife biologist, and I really enjoy being able to, dig deeper in these questions of why and how ecosystems work and what we can do to help heal the planet. I develop management strategies and for species of conservation, for species of conservation concern, ranging from like box turtles to piping plovers to grasses and invertebrates. So I'm able to cover a whole wide range of things that my younger self would definitely be very proud of me for. I definitely had an interest in nature before my undergraduate experience. I definitely did not really highlight birds nearly as much before college. So as a kid, I was the outdoorsy one, of course. I was known as like the bug girl, or like the one that would always go pick up the snake. There's a picture of me as like a 3-year-old holding a rat snake. And it's just who I am. It's very on brand. But as a kid, I didn't know like the names, and I didn't know how I could figure out what these animals and plants that I was looking at were called. So I would often like just make up names for them. And so, now that I'm an actual biologist and I have these tools to be able to figure out what exactly a species is that I'm looking at, I feel like I'm fulfilling a childhood dream of mine. It's really life fulfilling.
And as part of your work, do you act as an educator for other people?
I do. And I've had a range of different jobs and different levels of outreach. So in my most recent position at the Martha's Vineyard Land Bank, I would help lead walks, tell people about the birds that I see because, that's definitely my passion. Sprinkle in maybe some rock facts and geology facts too. Also, I'm pretty active on social media about just sharing my experiences as a birder. Both my Instagram and Twitter are filled with bird photos, both good and bad. I think most of them are actually pretty bad because I'm taking a digiscope photo with my camera through my binoculars. But hey, I'm having a blast. And I'm just staying true to myself and showing people how much fun I'm having on my own. I've taken everyone in my immediate family birding at least once. And, they ask repeatedly, like, oh, let's go do this. And I think I'm not sure if they do it just to see the smile on my face, but I really enjoy them being out there with me. And I can't wait to, grab more of my friends and grab my nieces and my nephews into just being interested in science and just being proud of their interests in general. I am a strong believer that no bird is a basic bird. There's no boring birds. Every bird is interesting. You just kind of change your lens a little bit. If you see a house sparrow or maybe a rock pigeon walking around, just watch their behavior because they're really interesting just to watch what they're doing, what they're picking at, maybe something interesting about the bird physically. So really appreciate just the birds that you have outside your window in your backyard, maybe, because they're still interesting and they're still cool and they're still necessary.
I met up with Camille during a vacation to California in 2018. Camille is a science educator and at the time was co-founder of an after-school nature program for young children called Coyote Kids. We met in Elysian Park in Los Angeles, and this piece is from episode 38.
One of the things I wanted to mention on the show was how when we met just now, I was a little bit late because driving in LA traffic was quite scary. Yay me for doing it.
Yeah, good job. Congratulations.
Thank you. But as I drew into the parking lot, I thought, I wonder how I'll recognise Camille.
Yeah.
There you were with your binoculars out, staring intently into a tree. And I thought, oh, this is like a mirror. This is what people see when they come see me.
Then I love how we had the comparison of being distracted as easily as a dog to a squirrel.
Absolutely. All weekend I've been telling people that, and I've been doing it. I've been noticing myself doing it. Just suddenly, as soon as I see movement, I'm like, what's that? There's a bird. I've got to go and have a look. And yeah, that's
Guilty.
So funny. But also, while we were sitting here setting up, we've seen quite a variety of birds just in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about some of the birds that you do see here?
Elysian Park, it's actually the second largest city park in Los Angeles. So Griffith Park is obviously the largest. It's over 4,000 acres. I don't know exactly how big this one is, but it's quite big. It wraps around the Dodger Stadium. So there's a lot of traffic in the area, but it's actually really amazing. It's this little oasis when you go up in the hills and you have these views of the Los Angeles sky, the skyscape. And the birds here are amazing. I mean, just before you came in the few minutes, I got out of the car and I was like, well, I wonder if it's going to be a good morning for birds. And I literally saw 7 or 8 species immediately. So I was like, oh, yeah, we're good.
What did you see?
There was the red-shouldered hawk that was calling that we heard before we saw. And that flew by. And then there was there's a lot of house finch in this area. That's a pretty common one. I saw Anna's hummingbird, which are always so much fun to watch. There was just this western bluebird that we just saw attacking himself in a car mirror, which was really fun to watch.
And yay, I finally saw a bluebird, so that was great. And
then, the California towhee, of course. And there's a couple of those. They're very common.
And we had the woodpeckers, didn't we? The acorn woodpecker.
We had an acorn woodpecker, and I saw a downy woodpecker before you came as well. So the two species that are mostly seen in this area, I would say.
So what would be the list that you would tell the children to look out for?
Yeah, it's a good question. The big common ones, basically. I mean, the small ones, as we know, are hard to identify, like all the warblers and the vireos and such. Although the bush tit is pretty common, and because they're so gregarious and they're always in these groups and they're so much fun and they sound like tiny birds. That's what I love about them. It's like you hear it, that has to be a tiny bird, and it is a tiny bird. So those ones are fun to identify with the kids. But the American crow, the common raven, that's actually a big challenge to try to distinguish between the two, because from far away. They do look quite alike. The red-tailed hawk, of course, because those are actually pretty common in this area. So we usually see at least one or two on a Coyote Kids morning, which is 3 hours in the morning once a month. And then we talk about my personal favorite is the black Phoebe. It's absolutely adorable. It's a flycatcher. It's just black and has this white belly. It's so cute. And I love those. So yeah, I'd say those are the American crow, common raven, the red-tailed hawk.
Was that the acorn woodpecker again?
I think so.
It was definitely woodpecker sounding.
Yeah. And then the California towhee is the one I was forgetting as well. And sometimes we see spotted towhee here as well, which are beautiful. They're just a little more shy.
After our interview, I walked around Elysian Park with Camille, and you can hear about the birds we saw in episode 39. Kate Shaw, host of Strange Animals podcast, tells us about one of her favourite birds, the Indigo Bunting, from episode 33.
Hi, I'm Kate Shaw from Strange Animals podcast, bringing you some information about the Indigo Bunting. North America is lucky enough to have a number of common birds that are blue, including various bluebirds, jays, and buntings, but the male Indigo Bunting in his breeding plumage is one of the most spectacular. The Indigo Bunting is a small finch about the size of a sparrow. In the casual birder style of measurement, I'd compare it to the size of a plum, but not a great big juicy plum, just a little one, maybe with the grape for the head. We'll draw eyes on the grape and no one will know the difference. It lives in the eastern United States and Canada in summer, and in southern Mexico and Central America in the winter. That's a 2,000-kilometer migration one way. Not bad for a bird the size of a little plum. During the migration, the birds mostly fly at night and navigate by the stars. Males migrate first, followed by females. The female Indigo Bunting is a soft brown with darker brown streaks on her breast. During the winter, the male is mostly brown too, but in his breeding plumage he's a brilliant, glorious blue all over. His legs and bill are dark and he has black lores, the area between a bird's eye and its bill. The male's head is the darkest blue, with his body a slightly paler blue. The bill is conical. But the Indigo Bunting is not technically blue. Its feathers contain no blue pigment, just black. It looks blue because of the way the feathers diffract light, which explains why it appears different in different lights. I've seen this myself when birding in early morning. In the pale morning light, especially if it's foggy or overcast, male Indigo Buntings sometimes look pale green. In other lights, they can appear dark gray instead of brilliant blue. The female Indigo Bunting builds a nest by herself, incubates her eggs by herself, and feeds the hatchlings by herself. The male basically just sits on a twig and sings, and occasionally he has a fight with another male. I'm trying not to judge him. The Indigo Bunting prefers brushy areas and hedgerows, farmland, fields, open woodlands and orchards, and sometimes swampy areas. It eats seeds and insects. Thistle feeders will sometimes attract Indigo Buntings, but they're not usually backyard birds except during the winter. If you live in the Midwestern United States, it can be easy to mistake an Indigo Bunting for a male blue grosbeak when their ranges overlap, but the grosbeak is larger and has chestnut wing bars. It's also not as pretty because it looks frowny like it's really angry at someone, but I'm probably biased since Indigo Buntings are one of my favorite summer visitors.
I was delighted to speak with Jessica Delisle, co-host of Retail Nightmares podcast, about the Steller's jays she sees from the balcony of her apartment in Vancouver, British Columbia.
I don't remember actually when it started, but it's been sort of a long time friendship that we've had with, it started just with one Steller's jay, and we realized afterwards that it was a male, and he would sort of fluff up his feathers and sit and just watch us. There's a fence outside of our windows in our apartment, and he'll just sit on the fence and watch us. And so we eventually started, sort of interacting with it, and it was coming closer. And so we would put out peanuts for it. And then we realized that he had a mate who would come over, but was was a lot more skittish than he was. So we nicknamed them Plumpo and Jumpo because he's quite a bit larger than she is.
And because she was nervous?
She's very nervous. She jumps around a lot, and she rubs her beak on branches and railings and fences and that sort of thing, and never really settles down. Oh. But Plumpo, the male, will just sit in the same spot for sometimes half an hour and just be so calm looking, and his little feathers will blow in the wind, and it's so cute.
Could you describe for me what a Steller's jay looks like?
Sure. They're mostly blue, and they've got some black. They've got sort of a little crest on the top of their heads. He's got some pretty cute little blue feathers sort of above his eyes, almost like eyebrows. The reason why we realized it was the same bird over and over again coming to visit us is because he's missing sort of one of his little digits on his little talon. I kept looking every time there was a Steller's jay out there, and I realized that it was the same guy every time, and it was so cute.
And you mentioned, I think, that he had a mate because they raised a family?
Yeah, we could tell that they were nesting because all of a sudden they were not just getting nuts for themselves, but they'd take a bunch and then fly away. And sometimes they'd have sticks and leaves and branches and stuff. So I knew that they were making a nest. And then for a long time, it was only Plumpo that we were seeing. So it must have been Jumpo was, keeping the eggs warm. And then it was funny because he always looks pretty good. Like his plumage is always very immaculate. And then during this time, he was really disheveled looking, and he'd have feathers out of place sticking out in all direction, and he'd have a bit of cobwebs all over his crest and that sort of thing, and be kind of dirty. Sometimes he'd have like bird poo on him. And then after a while, they introduced us to their 3 little babies, and they were so loud and so awkward and much smaller than them. And they had learned to fly, but they weren't very good at it. So they were sort of landing on things and testing them out to see if they could balance on them. And then they couldn't. And then they'd sort of fall down. And it was hilarious.
Carrie Poppy is co-host of the podcast Oh No, Ross and Carrie. I found out about her connection with the feral pigeons that nested on her balcony when I met with her in Los Angeles in 2018.
So when I was a kid, I loved animals. I still do, have my whole life. I think like most people, I more gravitated toward mammals because they felt more like me. And I remember thinking like, oh, people who bird watch, like that's weird. They're, it's such an unapproachable animal. Might as well be a fish. I don't understand them. And then I worked at an animal sanctuary called Farm Sanctuary for a couple of years. And they had chickens and turkeys. And they were so fun. And they had their own personalities. And they loved getting scratches. And I started having my favorite chicken and my favorite turkey. And then I was like, oh, okay, birds are pretty cool. But I still wasn't into flighted birds. I was into these big, fat birds that'll sit in your lap. But then I moved here and with my boyfriend, Drew, and he had this big balcony, and we decided to plant plants on it, and then the birds just started coming. And then I thought, oh my gosh, it's just like a mammal that comes right at you. Like it's an animal who just appears in front of you. And all of a sudden the idea of flight became amazing. So yeah, that pigeons showed up the most. We get a few songbirds, but I guess just like since pigeons were the ones that caught me, they're the ones I still love.
So how long have you been having pigeons coming to the balcony?
A couple of years. Yeah, 2.5-ish years.
And you've had them breeding and having babies. When was your baby born?
We think that it was about 2 weeks ago now. The mother was a very ferocious mom for the first week or so. So I had seen her in there and I thought she was still just on the eggs. And then one day she was moving around a ton and I looked under her and I was like, oh my gosh, the baby hatched and is kind of big. So she had just been keeping the baby warm for, I'm guessing, a few days. So now I would guess that baby's 2 weeks to maybe 16 or 17 days.
And it's already got feathers. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it looks like a small pigeon.
Yeah. It only takes them 30 days from hatching to fledging.
So you sound like you've done some reading on pigeons.
I've read the Wikipedia. I've been reading up on them. I mean, basically as needed. So when I'm like, what should I feed them? Then I'll look that up. And then, why are there only 2 eggs? Are there always 2 eggs? Look that up. So I've kind of been piecemeal filling in my pigeon education.
You can hear the rest of the interview in episode 36. Carla, co-host of Number One Rerun podcast, took part in one of the Casual Birder podcast 10-minute bird watches. And as you'll hear, when you live in an urban environment, you take what you can get.
Hi Suzy, this is Carla, the creator of Britpod Scene. So I'm recording for you in a place called Wallington, which is just outside of Croydon. And it's as near to the edge of Surrey as you can get before you tip into South London. So as you can hear, quite a built up area, and I don't get to see many birds around here. I only really see pigeons. And at the moment I'm just watching 2 pigeons out of the window, and one of them has found a chip from the local chippy, or one of many local chippies. And he's not letting the other one have it at all. So it's all kicking off here. Pigeon wars. That's a motorbike. Don't try to identify that as a bird. I can confirm it was a motorbike. I can't really see anything else for you. Even the pigeons have stopped fighting now. They've just, accepted gracefully. That's a big double-decker bus. Again, I must clarify, not a bird, a double-decker bus. And here is a single-decker bus. I mean, if you ever want to change the title of your podcast to The Casual Busser, I'm more than happy to guest on that for you. I have them running here until, I believe they run till another double-decker. I believe they run till about 2 a.m. and then they start again about 5 a.m. So able to do, pretty much full coverage of that for you if you fancy it. I can now see a brand new pigeon. Now there's no confirmation if this pigeon also has found a chip. He certainly looks well fed, so could have found a kebab instead, not sure. Can't confirm that at this stage. He's just flown away. I think that's all you're going to get, Suzy. I could sit here for 10 minutes with my head hanging out the window, but I don't think much else is going to happen.
Amy Chillag is a writer and producer for CNN Special Projects. In 2019, she wrote about the power of birdwatching for peace of mind. In episode 63, I spoke with Amy, and she told me about the joy she feels at seeing the birds that visit her backyard in Atlanta, Georgia.
I think most of us yearn to be outdoors. We spend so much of our time, in our houses, driving to and from work, in the subway, on the train, and just that lack of wind and breeze and sun and just getting outside. And that's really, how my attraction to birds got started. Even at a young age, my dad encouraged me. And I don't know if everybody even has this. Parents that say, we want you to be outdoors. So we had a little house in South Florida, and my dad would encourage me to lie in our hammock and look up in the tree. And, very early on, I would fall asleep to the sound of birds. And back then I don't think I really noticed so much their color. And I wasn't like a bird geek, so to speak. I didn't go running to my books to look up the types of birds. It just brought me peace of mind. Whenever I walk out my back door, I have a nice sunroom that my father helped me build, and it's a lot of windows, very high, big windows, kind of cathedral style, so they can look up into the treetops. So it's even wonderful to just lie here lazily and look up into the treetops. But when I open that door, it makes a difference. The wind comes in, I step up onto the grass, I hear the rustling of the leaves, and I just wanted people to understand how much it has helped me. As I had shared in the article, my mother passed away about a year ago, and very untimely. And one of the few things that helped me is to be able to step out and just let nature soothe me, right? It's like a self-soothing to feel that breeze and to hear the rustling of the leaves and to see. And then that mindfulness is really what I focused on in that article. And it turns out I'm not the only one. That when you see a bird, you don't see it yet, right? You see a movement in the leaves. It's almost like a game. So you have to use all of your senses to really focus on what am I seeing, and then keep your eye on that point and bring those binoculars right up to your eyes and use the focus wheel. And there it is. It just, rewards you. And really, it's my form of mindfulness. I literally could feel my muscles relaxing and my shoulders come down, and I'm able to, just exhale, really. And it just happens naturally. And then the bird is just, I don't know. How can you explain, Suzy? It's just this little creature, this life that it's almost, and I'm somebody who likes to use a lot of words. I don't know how to describe the feeling. I feel joy in my heart when I look at them. And really, any stress or I'm actually quite a nervous person. The nerves just dissolves, that feeling of nervousness. And I feel like this can be something that we all can do. And really, very much it's about being in nature, being outside.
You can find a link to Amy's article in the episode notes. In episode 69, I spoke with Stephanie Seymour, a regular contributor to the show. Stephanie is a singer-songwriter who is also a passionate birder. In 2019, she released an album called There Are Birds. All of the songs featured birds and had titles such as Blue Jay, Ruby-Crowned Kinglet, and Veery.
I have been a bird watcher since 2004. I had originally lived in New York City for a long, long time, and when my husband and I got married about 16, 17 years ago, we moved to New Jersey, and I suddenly discovered birds quite by accident online. I was searching, and the Christmas bird count popped up, and I became enthralled by trying to identify a house sparrow, believe it or not, on my street. So I have been quite a passionate bird watcher since then. It hooked me right in, and I haven't really traveled across overseas to bird watch, but mostly do it in my local area in New Jersey, around New Jersey, and I've taken trips within the states, Arizona, California, Texas, Maine, to bird watch. So I'm really passionate bird watcher. And I also had been a musician since I was 15 years old. I was playing drums in one band that was quite popular, and we had gotten a record deal. And I was doing that for a while in my early 20s. Then I sort of evolved into becoming a lead singer with my band Birdie, by the way, before I was even a bird watcher. Then I really stopped playing music for a while because I got so into bird watching, and it wasn't conducive to go to bed at 4 a.m. and have to get up at 5 a.m. to go see the good birds. So it sort of was like just a natural evolution where bird watching really just took over my life for a good 7, 8, 9 years. But what happened was an old bandmate of mine passed away, and the brother of my bandmate had asked me to do the tribute show. So of course, I said yes. I would not pass that opportunity up. And I began singing again from that one show that we did. It was a really wonderful night. I met a lot of people, a lot of Adam's friends that way, and became intertwined again in the music world, singing backup for a few people. And then I was just sitting on my couch one day, and I had all of a sudden a flash of inspiration when the lyrics for Ruby Crowned Kinglet came into my head. But it was weird because I kind of heard the whole chorus all at once. And then within about 45 minutes, I heard the whole song sort of fully formed in my head, like as if you were playing it on the radio. And that was it. I yelled downstairs to my husband. I'm like, we're making a record about birds.
Oh, wow.
And that was how I came up with the idea. The songs, really, I did not belabor the songs on the record. Not that they all came to me in 45 minutes, but if they didn't come to me easily enough within a week or 2, 3, I would say that's not going to happen. It was like I kept getting these songs just coming to me. It was quite an amazing experience. So I just knew that the record was meant to be.
Now, each of the songs relates to a particular bird species,
Yes.
but they're not necessarily about the birds, are they?
Right.
They're kind of like inspired by. Can you tell me a little bit about a couple of the songs?
Sure. I mean, a good example of a song that is not about the bird but uses the bird quite metaphorically is Ruby Crown Kinglet. I mean, honestly, that song is really about my feelings of anxiety and depression, and I just used the bird to kind of tell that story, like a little bird in the world and being overwhelmed. Really, the songs are about me, told through the bird's point of view. Sometimes there are stories of things that happened, like when we saved that house sparrow, Emily, so House Sparrow is really just a story about that time when we saved the bird. But saying how, each and every single species and bird and person has every right to be here as much as everyone else.
I also like the fact that you've got a couple of songs that are about how you feel about seeing the birds. I'm thinking of the Blue Jay one that, you talk about the colours and everything. But one of my favourites is actually the final song for Migration, is it?
Migration's Over.
Migration's Over. Which is actually about bird watching.
That song is just about bird watching. It's about going to Central Park one day and, in late spring and realizing there are really more bird watchers there than birds. You're trying to eke out that one good bird and they're just not around. So I actually had that song. I was thinking of snippets of that song for a few years before I even had the concept for the record, because I was just kind of thinking about every time I went to Central Park in late spring, it was the same old story. We were all looking at each other like, where's the bird?
I highly recommend Stephanie's album, and you can find it on Bandcamp. The link is in the episode notes. Photographer Jocelyn Anderson's award-winning bird portraits are absolutely stunning, and her gorgeous slow-motion videos of woodpeckers, chickadees and nuthatches taking food from her hand draw me in every time.
So I've always enjoyed birds. I think they're absolutely beautiful creatures. Like the feather is just a work of art in itself. When I really started getting into birds about 4 years ago, so I used to do a lot of running, so like 50Ks, 50 milers. So like for training for this, I'd be running for 4 hours at a time. And I needed recovery time, so like I would go and walk the nature trails. And I was like, oh, there's some cool birds here. Like, why don't I get a camera and just like try and take photos? And that absolutely like opened up my world. Because I remember I was walking on the trail, and there's this tiny little ping pong sized puffball just like bouncing around the bushes like crazy. And I'm like, what is this bird? I have never seen this bird before. And it was a golden crowned kinglet. And I was like, how did I not realize this bird even existed? So that just snowballed, because then I was like, whoa, and then I noticed there are these beautiful great blue herons around. And then just learning about all the birds that were just that live, so close to me, and I had never even noticed them. And then it's just the more I learn about them, is I become even more fascinated with them. To give you an example, so I learned about the great blue heron courtship over the last few years, which is the male great blue heron gives a stick to the female, and the couple of times I watched it, she would just grab the stick and then she'd add it to the nest. But there was one time where a male brought a stick to a female and he looked very pleased with himself, and she just took it and she just launched it. And I was just like, oh, that poor guy. And it's just seeing things like that, how did I not know such a thing existed? So, and that's just great blue herons, and learning about all the different species. And the photography allows me to really get closer to the birds without physically being closer, because I use a longer lens, so I can get more details, get closer to the bird in that way. So really just being able to the more I learn about birds, the more I'm fascinated by them. They're just such amazing creatures.
You can hear more from Jocelyn in episode 80. I'm inspired by the huge numbers of women birders working in conservation to protect birds, in the guiding community who educate others, and among the general birdwatching community who advocate for diversity and equality in all spaces. I'm looking forward to speaking with many of them in future episodes. This episode is brought to you by Casual Birder Weekly, the show's newsletter. I connect with you in so many different places, the show's Facebook group, Instagram, Twitter, and it can mean that our contact is a little fragmented. This newsletter is a great way for us all to stay in touch. Each week I share tips to help you get the best birding experiences, bird news that's caught my eye, recommendations for other podcasts or books I've enjoyed, and I let you know about any planned group birdwatch events. Sign up now. If you enjoy what you hear, please tell a friend or give the show a shout out on social media, and tag me if you do so. You can also help support the show's production by contributing to the show's tip jar, and thank you this week to my 2 anonymous supporters that bought me a virtual coffee. Links to the newsletter and to the show's tip jar can be found in the episode notes. I'm coming up to my 100th episode. If you'd like to send a greeting to be read out on that episode, please leave me a message on SpeakPipe or send me an email on my contact form on my website at casualbirder.com. Thank you to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder podcast.